Thank you all very much for coming. I'm going to say a little bit more after the official introduction is given by the Deputy Director of the Alfred Deakin Institute, Professor Andrea Whitcomb. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Sim. Good morning, everybody. So, as Sim said, I'm Andrea Whitcomb, and I'm one of the Deputy Directors of the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalization. I wear the research hat. So, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this workshop on contemporary democracy and its critics. I also wish to acknowledge that we are meeting on Wurundjeri country today, and therefore I wish to acknowledge Indigenous elders past and present, and to thank them for enabling us to come together on their country. I think it is a great privilege to be able to do so. So, the themes of this workshop, concerned as they are with contemporary democracy and its critics, are key to the work of the Institute, ADI for short we call it. ADI is concerned in large part with addressing the problems that arise from growing inequality, lack of social inclusion and belonging, increasing political instability, rising xenophobia, and increasingly strident claims around identity. We do that by bringing together a team of interdisciplinary researchers with political scientists like yourselves, sociologists, anthropologists, and historians, and in my case, heritage studies and museum studies. That's what the camp I belong in. Our work is organised around 4 core themes, which include understanding the relations between governance, development, and peace, the role of increasing mobilities, diversity and multiculturalism, heritage and indigeneity, and culture, environment, and science. Across these streams, we are concerned with how to improve relations between people, how to ensure greater sense of belonging, opportunity, and equality for those who are marginalised, thus hopefully helping to build a more just and equitable society. Now, it seems to me that understanding what is happening within democratic societies and why it is that democratic systems appear to be failing us is key to addressing these problems. It isn't only that we seem to be living in a world driven by populism in which reason is no longer the basis of decision-making. It is also that faith in civic and political life seems to be weakening and that authoritarianism is on the rise. Cynicism, fear of the other, self-preservation and self-interest seem to reign. And while these are values that make democracy rather hard to fight for, they also make it all the more important to find out how to do so. So if this workshop can lead to some greater understanding as to what is happening, why and how to address these issues, I think you and our institute will be doing a bit towards addressing how we can improve the ability of political structures to help us address some of the basic problems of our time. I wish you well with your discussions, and I think you are in very good hands to start that process with Professor Morlino's opening keynote, titled Beyond Populism, Party Changes in Europe. If I am understanding the title correctly, I think we may be about to learn what political parties in Europe are doing to address the challenges posed by rising populism, a populism that is leading to the very problems that ADI is focused on combating. This should be a fitting and stimulating start to our discussions. And to get us on the way, I will invite Zim, the organizer of this workshop, back to more properly introduce Professor Morlino. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you once again for coming along to this workshop on contemporary democracy and its critics. The title, for those of you who aren't political theorists, echoes Robert Dowell's classic book, Democracy and Its Critics, in which Dowell compared and engaged different perspectives on democracy. As well as being a simply wonderful book, it's also a very unusual book because it's set up as a debate between Democrats of various stripes and the critics of democracy on the other hand. And given the state of politics in many countries, such a debate seems both important and timely. And I'm looking forward to a stimulating discussion in the manner of Dowell, focused on thinking about how democracies work and how they can work. A highlight of today's workshop is the keynote by Professor Leonardo Morlino, who is exceptionally well qualified to set the tone for this discussion. Leonardo Morlino is Vice Rector and Professor of Political Science and Director of the International Research Center on Democracies and Democratization at the Free International University for Social Studies, also known by its Italian acronym LUIS. He was president of the International Political Science Association between 2009 and 2012. In his academic research, Professor Morlino has contributed significantly to our understanding of democracy. He is the author of 30 books and over 200 journal articles and book chapters. One of his particularly well-known contributions to the scholarship is his theory of anchoring, which provides an account of the process of democratic consolidation and legitimation. Professor Morlino has also made seminal contributions to our understanding of democratic quality, with a framework that identifies the various qualities of democracies and points clearly toward how such qualities might be operationalized for empirical analysis. Many of Professor Morlino's ideas on anchoring and democratic quality are brought together and developed in a modern classic in this field, his book Changes for Democracy, Actors, Structures, Processes, published by Oxford University Press. More recently, Professor Morlino has been producing work that seeks to understand the changes that are occurring in contemporary democracies. Today, he's going to be speaking about some of that work, specifically on the topic of change in European party politics. Before we move to that lecture, I'd like to thank a few people who have been heavily involved in making this workshop happen. First, I'd like to thank Professor Andrea Whitcomb and the rest of the ADI leadership who have generously provided the funding for this workshop. I'd also like to express my gratitude for all the work undertaken by Tara Brennan, Administrative Officer at ADI. Thank you very much, Tara, for all your organizational efforts. And when I crafted the proposal for this workshop, I really had no idea how it would be received. And as it turns out, there's actually quite a lot of people in Melbourne thinking very seriously about the state of contemporary democracy, which is great. And we received a really good number of proposals. So a big thank you to the many of you who sort of embraced this idea and agreed to present. And to the presenters, I should note that there may be recordings of your presentations. Please let me know if you find this a troubling prospect. Also, I've tapped several of you to chair panels. So thanks to those of you who agreed to do this. And special thanks to Professor Baogang He, who's agreed to round out the discussion today with some concluding thoughts. And also a big thank you to those of you who are participating in the audience. And that's all I'd like to say, apart from saying that I hope the workshop turns out to be enjoyable and stimulating for all of you. I'll now pass over to Professor Morlino to begin the debate properly with his keynote lecture entitled Beyond Populism, Party Changes in Europe. Please join me in giving Professor Morlino a warm welcome.
So, thanks a lot, Sim, for invitation, for organizing this day. I'm very glad to be here, to have the possibility of discuss with you themes, topic. I've been very much working on it for years. Actually, I see the 5 panels are all very relevant topic. I'm working now on a book for Oxford, particularly on the topic of democracy and inequality. And for example, in my work, the work by Hilmas, Professor Hilmas, if he's here, was very, very helpful. Following a suggestion by Zim, I decided to touch this other topic about what I say beyond populism. You will realize immediately why I say beyond, or the reason of the title. But let me make a sort of reminder, maybe I think obvious aspect that you have to keep in mind before entering the topic. First of all, of course, in our work, explanation is very important. We are not in big data, whether we may not need any longer explanation. Explanation is very important. And in this topic particularly, I will deal with the reference to the past, comparison with the past, spatial comparison are also very relevant. Second aspect, to be very much explicit on this. In our work, Andrea, maybe not in your work, but in our work, the normative perspective is very relevant. And is simply honest, open to be explicit on this. What actually worries us, at least was actually worries me about the populism is the anti-liberal component that I see in some of the populist movement parties' leaders. Is the authoritarian values, are the authoritarian values related to some of the populist programs, some of the populist talk? Is the idea that, an old idea, particularly in the old left, shared by the old left, that the substance comes first, the procedure, while we know how procedure, after all, is important to have a substantive result. My third point, my third reminder, I don't like the term populism. Populism is a way to offend the enemy today. Not even probably neo-populism, it's a confusing term. Within populism, there is a neo-nationalism. There is a manipulation of discontent by leaders. But, yes, there is a but. I remember I was so lucky to be a student, when I was at Yale, a student of Robert Dahl. And Robert, at that time, some years earlier actually, vis-a-vis when I was my years in Yale, Robert Dahl, impressive also as a teacher, not only as author, said, let's forget about polyarchy, about democracy. Let's talk about polyarchy, you remember? And one of his main book of early 70s was Polyarchy, Participation and Opposition. But everyone forgot of polyarchy, even Dahl, even the late Dahl in the 90s or later his last book. And everyone kept talking about democracy. The point that we are not in an ivory tower. We were to look also at even the language of the people, even the kind of wording of the people. We were to take into account, of course, their need. But our analysis cannot be separated by what people say and think. So if now is populism the word that everyone uses, of course the media are very important in this, let's cope with populism. And let's try to be precise, at least to be precise what we mean by populism. You will see. So let me start with this reminder. Let me start my presentation. The idea of populism, at least in the way I put it, also related to my work, to my field research. It was basically focused, particularly this research on Southern Europe, is that it's very much related to the economic crisis. So let's give a moment a look to the problem of the economic crisis and the change of parties in the past. Then we look at the way the economic crisis has an impact on politics, of course focused on parties. Then we look for some explanation, the emergence of protest party. At the end, the idea of beyond populism is that actually we are talking of protest party, not of populism. With a protest party with specific characteristics. a protest party that can be present in right, can be a neo-nationalist party, can be present in left, or can even be ambiguous in between, as for example, the Italian Five-Star movements. And let's give a look a moment to the political consequences. If I start, but this is, I'll do very, very quickly. I take partially for granted this. You may remember that when we analyze the connections and the consequences of economic crisis on politics, we usually, the first reference is to the Great Depression. Not to Great Recession that we had now, but to the Great Depression. And when you look at the Great Depression, of course, you immediately remember what is still in history, in our history, a unique case. That is the breakdown of a democracy that was already mass politics. Because we had a lot of breakdown of starting phase of democracy where there was still the change of mass politics. In the Weimar Germany, mass politics was consolidated. And this made Weimar Germany really unique case. I don't go into details, but you may remember that this is the moment when, for example, in the UK, there is the change of two-partyism, from liberalism to conservative to Labour Party conservative. So there is an impact in terms of changing the key parties. And there's a moment of crisis, a deep crisis also in UK, 1930, 1931. You may remember the reaction, Roosevelt, New Deal. So the impact that is, and you also will remember, this is a key element, the way how the left, particularly in Northern Europe, starting accepting the electoral rules. That is the democratic procedure. And then you have, of course, the great transformation after World War II with a sort of regeneration of democracy and the welfare state. A re-legitimation of democracy through the welfare state. That is also the consequence, if you like, of the second economic crisis. The second economic crisis that is brought about by the destruction of the war. When you go to the third economic crisis, that is very important. You remember, follow up the phase of mobilization of the 60s. And actually, the way out ended in the way Peter Gurevich was suggesting with this book, Hard Times, Politics in Hard Times, that is through an agreement, a neo-corporative agreement with an important role of trade unions, an important role of association of entrepreneurs. And this has been also very important, for example, in the 90s of last century in Europe, in terms of the role again of unions and the social entrepreneur. But when we come to the Great Recession, particularly if we focus on Europe, is in the years I wrote in the slides. Then, where are the unions? Where are the social entrepreneurs? We are only with the parties that has been changing, profoundly changing in their organization, and we will see better at this point in a moment, a problem of social movements. The resurgence or surgence, emergence of social movements. So if we concentrate on this question, how the Great Recession affected one of the channels of political expression, particularly party system, and what are the changing adaptation persistence of some of characterizing patterns within partner party system, we focus on what has been, particularly in a book I published with Paul Grave last year. We see what is, in a sense, my main question. I think it's not important. I don't like to be boring and to take more time, too much time. I think it's not important to look at the data such as change in GDP and employment, particularly in Southern Europe, data about, again, employment rate, data about the growth of public debt in Southern Europe vis-à-vis other countries, some other countries. But we can concentrate a little bit on this, on the relevant dimension to be explored. I said it's not important to look at this kind of data. Let me be more precise on this. I was suggesting, I think you realized immediately, of course, as good colleagues, you realized immediately. Here, there is a mix of structural macroeconomic data, unemployment, public debt, and so on, and then we have to consider also micro political data in terms of attitude through surveys and so on, and we put together this kind of aspect. But if we consider in more or less in the same years, for example, in Eastern Europe, we don't find the same data. Poland never had any kind of recession. Even in Hungary, I've been meeting, I don't know if lucky or unlucky to know well Orban when he was a liberal leader, a good liberal leader. Orban had to do with a profound dissatisfaction of the people. Hungarians were, for years, the most dissatisfied people in Europe, more than Italians. There is a championship, a very good tie-to-tie race between Italians and Hungarians for years. But you realize in this way how the guy that has been always very clever, I assure you, always very clever, was decided, and why he decided to fully change himself as a leader from a liberal leader with a strong of attention to procedural communication, media, and so on, to an authoritarian leader, as actually he is. But there are the reasons. There are the way how Orban decided to manipulate the dissatisfaction of Hungarians to go on with staying in power with his Fidesz. So anyway, when we Czech Republic, when we consider data about Slovakia, when we consider data about the Visegrad group, I know what I think. You know what I mean. We don't have this kind of structural economic downturn. We don't find at all. But we do find populist party, or what people used to know as populist party. So again, populism is beyond the economic crisis. Although when I analyze Southern Europe or other European countries, the aspect of the economic crisis is very relevant to make an explanation. We have here a typical methodological point that I think you know very well, the equifinality. It is different causes, similar results. And this is a typical of when we discuss populism and neo-populism, of the variety of the factors that bring about that kind of solution. So let's a moment forget the data, and let's stay on the dimension, the analytical dimension to be explored. This is interesting. When we consider what happens
in terms of impact of economic crisis, or impact, this is an important point to understand, impact of other big phenomena, such as the immigration. That is the other problem that is very important for Europe today. Basically, we have to look at two procedural dimensions: participation, competition. And the empirical dimension that are relevant when you go into the analysis, the empirical analysis, are these ones. In terms of electoral participation, I know that there is I think a paper about electoral analysis. In terms of conventional participation, in terms of movements, in terms of non-institutionalized, non-conventional movement, but also in terms of interest group activism. As I said, no longer trade unions, no longer association, but lobby, yes, there are, and are also particularly active in this period. Also, the other dimension is in terms of what kind of competition we have. Competition within the parties and with the radicalization, that is a key point, and the new protest party that are related, all these three aspects, radicalization, new protest party, repolarization system, are very much related with one another. You know very well how to say, the systemic tenet are very important when you analyze competition and also participation, but particularly when you analyze competition. So the three aspects are very relevant, very much related. I will come back on this in a moment, because this is bring to me to the first kind of explanation when I consider the economic crisis. And this is my way, in a sense, to merge the two streams of analysis. I said there is a stream of analysis where you have the emergence of a populist party without economic crisis. And there is a stream of the analysis where you have the emergence of populist party. We will see better at this point, but allow me to have this shortcut. The populist party through economic crisis. When you look at the economic crisis, the impact of the economic crisis on parties, on party system, on participation, on competition, you realize that you have simply, allow me to say simply, a catalyst effect. That is, the economic crisis is just pushing, is just accelerating phenomena that are already in the country, in the culture, in the tradition, in the heritage of the country at the moment. They just push. They can transform, no doubt, but they are there. So economic crisis has a catalyst effect, as, for example, big critical issue, big critical problem, as we could say, immigration policy, has a catalyst effect in terms, in the sense that a political leader can pick up and manipulate for creating consensus and support for their parties, for their kind of policies. This is the biggest difference vis-à-vis the previous analysis of the impact of economic crisis, say, in the 30s of last century. In a sense, the legitimation, stabilization, acceptance of democratic institution at this point get a level that we cannot avoid going on with democracy. Of course, we can manipulate democracy. We can transform. We can distort democracy. At the end, you have another reality. This is what is happening, no doubt about that. But you cannot say we we destroy democracy, we are anti-democratic. This is not possible. So one key element, one key difference that we have to consider, to appreciate, if we take the longer time, the longer term, is how today the impact of the economic crisis, or the impact of even other kind of dramatic crisis, dramatic problem, is always, almost always, a catalyst effect. It is an accelerating effect where the existing situation in each country, in terms, as I said, of legacy, in terms of culture, in terms of institution of that country, are pushed, are transformed, but again, a sort of domestic. So in this way, you also explain why you have this kind of variety, a variety of results, even within the populism. I don't know if this point is clear, but this is, in a sense, a key element in my analysis, in my explanation. Let me go a moment a little bit more in depth with some aspect. Let's take for granted the higher electoral volatility. Let's talk a moment about the free polarization. I said, when you analyze competition, you have to take for granted the systemic tenet. That this every part is defined by the other part. Okay? I think you understand the mechanism. So, if there is an obvious tendency, an obvious trend within any democracy, is toward to polarism. Why do we have here free polarization in most of our countries? Why is this happening? Because of the protest party, because of the, if you like, anti-establishment party, because of, and this is a key point, of reshaping of cleavages behind the free polarization. Of course, we could say the trend will be go back to the bipolarization. But once the problem in terms of reshaping of cleavages, in terms of the way the cleavages are reconceived, is going to be overcome. But the key element that we find in our country in this moment is precisely the reshaping of cleavages. For example, in terms of center-periphery, just to give an example to understand what I mean, the economic crisis, if we consider economic crisis, was a push toward decentralization, toward centralization. Now, in a situation like the Spanish one, what was the ironic result? The ironic result was freezing centralization of most of the cases, except the case where there was more tension, where there had been, in the past, an accommodation between center and periphery through the European funds. This is the truth now. Let me short a long story, make me short a long story. But at that point, in a situation of economic crisis, there was no more resources to allocate, or at least much less resources allocated. The great conflict, the great tension came out. So in Spain, you have a sort of divorce, a sort of dividing radicalization. On one hand, freezing or a stronger centralization, as in Portugal, as in Greece, as in Italy. On the other hand, the broke out of tension, the breaking out of tension that, of course, now the present government is trying to overcome. But in Italy, the center-right party, the Northern League, actually totally changed. Because the Northern League, the League today, is a rightist party. They forgot the basis of the beginning of the Northern League. But maybe I think there is another aspect that has to be understood in what's happening when we talk about the party change. And the other aspect is this one. Let me go back a little bit to the, the literature, the famous literature of Steinrock and, in a sense, our influent fathers, Lipset and so on. What is the basic idea of a cleavage? The basic idea of a cleavage is that they divide and unify. The cleavage, you are not to think to the cleavage in terms of dividing. That is wrong. You have to think of cleavage in terms of unification. They unify the camp. At that point, there is the competition. Okay? What happens in this situation, also with economic crisis or other big problem, the cleavage is no longer able to unify. It's only able to dividing, even in the left. So the left is going to split, as happened in Greece, as happened in Italy, as partially with the weakening of the left in Spain, as what's happening in other countries. That is in a sense a new meaning, a new aspect of the cleavage, except one. And this is the point. Except one, anti-establishment. This is the only cleavage that works as a cleavage in terms of unifying. Pro-establishment, anti-establishment. And this is the way, one of the reasons of the success of these parties that we call populist and neo-populist. Because that is, in a sense, a more superficial, manipulative result of discontent cleavage, where it's very easily to translate in anti-establishment. But this happens in Germany. This happens in Austria. It's not the case of, you remember, the pigs, Southern Europe. This is also the case of other countries. This happened in the Netherlands, where, for example, you have a left that is moving right, where you have a big problem with the social democratic left that is trying in this period, in these years, to move left in terms of the defense of welfare state. Because what happens at the same time in this moment is a problem in attacking the welfare state. That is in attacking what has been the main reason of legitimation of democracy all over the world. At least, maybe I am here very ethno-European, but in my view, the success of liberal democracy after World War II is due to reinvention of democracy through the welfare state. Once that you have attacking the welfare state, when you have the cutting of the welfare state, when you have the problem in terms of pension, revision, reforms of pension, working law about work, so provision about unemployment, you are attacking the roots of the legitimation of democracy. And this is happening, and this is behind the reshaping, for example, the left-right cleavages. This is behind this problem of anti-establishment, the aspect of anti-establishment. This is the core of actually the explanation of the party system change and the success of what we call populist party. Again, let's skip a little bit this aspect of data. If you like, I can give to Zim, the president, maybe is already there, and so you can look
later on if you are interested to this kind of data. But this is not the relevant point. The relevant point, the theoretical relevant point to be understood, of course, are related to trend, to the radicalization I was saying, the salience of the left-right with different results. So the cleavage is more salient, but is no longer able to unify. This is the point to remember, the free polarization, of course, the consequence party fragmentation. Behind, there is this problem, dissatisfaction with democracy. And the various way to react at leader level to the dissatisfaction of the people. That is a democracy no longer able to deliver. This is an important aspect we have to consider. This part of delegitimation of democracy, although we again don't dare to be explicit about say we are anti-democratic. As I said, no one today says we are not anti-democratic, but we are behaving in a way that actually we are basically anti-liberal. You know this, I will come back in my conclusion of this point. What we have been building was our, say, collective invention has been liberal democracy. And liberal democracy means that liberal aspect, division of labor, checks and balances, control of the power, is inextricably related to the possibility to delivering goods in terms not only of guarantee political and civil rights, but also in terms of guarantee social rights. You cannot break this kind of link. If you try to break this kind of link, you break democracy. But I'll come back on this point in a moment. Let's, of course, this is also related to let's go to another point. When we analyze the emergence of the protest party, when we analyze the emergence of the neo-populist party, this is, as example, Southern Europe, but it could be a little bit larger, we see that there are basically four patterns. I think that eventually the most interesting pattern is the first one. And that is Portugal is really a case, an ironic case of this kind of pattern. That is, in Portugal, the alienation was so strong that not only in the years we are considering there is a growth of emigration, particularly in France, but there is a lowering of electoral participation. Wow. The ironic result of this is the failure of a potential protest on your populist party and the success, you see the irony, of the traditional party. And then the traditional party were successful in implementing some kind of leftist policies. So at the end, Portugal escaped the entire logic of neo-populism in this way, because there were people too alienated to go and vote. The Spanish, or there are other similar cases, is the classic one. That is social movements, protracted social movements, stabilization, institutionalization of social movements. You cannot be, the case of Spain is really a symptomatic and important case. You cannot be surprised as the leaders of this case are our colleagues. Some of them was a student of mine. So they are going to the basic, to our handbook of political science to learn how to do. So it's the classic social movements, indignados, you remember, ciudadanos, and then the transformation. The third pattern is probably also as much as interesting as the first one. It is fragmented, small, highly ideologized groups that in some ways fractions, very much fractionalized group. Then the social movements come. There are leaders that always know how to lead, so the leaders become also the leaders of the social movements. And you have the development of Syriza, with then, of course, attempt of splitting, with different kind of events, but basically is a sort of merging, a sort of radicalized, imaginative party groups that enter the social movements and transform the social movements. So a totally different pattern vis-à-vis the Spanish one, vis-à-vis the first, more classic one. The Italian part is a little bit exceptional in a sense, because after all, there is a strong tradition of parties, and then there is a timing of elections that make it more difficult, this kind of Spanish pattern. So as soon the protest begins, immediately there is the stabilization. Immediately there is Grillo who understands what is going on, what is happening. And here, and in this kind of neo-populist movements, in this kind of other cases, particularly in Spain, not in Portugal, much less in Greece, you have also another aspect that is relevant. Please, excuse me. Please. You have also another aspect that is relevant. That is the impact of the technological transformation. We are not talking, we didn't mention this up to now, but actually this is a part of the catalyzing effect. It is the critical against representative democracy goes back to the dream, to the utopia of direct democracy. And so now the other dream that is related is that through internet, through digital tools, we could develop a new digital direct democracy. Unfortunately, the result is another kind of opportunity lost, because the result, if you look much less to Podemos, much less to Ciudadanos, where at least there is a group of leaders that led the parties, but if you look at faster movements, it's very authoritarian movements where there is particularly a leader that until recently were dominating the party strategy. Now it's partially changing, but basically the authoritarian component is still there. But this is another aspect to be considered. It is not only the technological advances, but also the transformation of media that enter into the electoral competition in terms of relevance of tweet, in the relevance of the social network, all this aspect that of course made the party activity largely different from what the previous one. And then of course some of the traditional parties were not able to modernize themselves.
And so part of their defeat and part of success of this new protest party is also related to the possibility, to the way how these parties were able to grasp and to exploit the new possibility of the new media, of the technological transformation. I think that these four patterns are interesting also because when you come to this an explanation of the pattern, you have to refer to the timing of elections, and I referred in my presentation on pattern, but above all to the legacy, to the different cultural legacy. This is strange. This is strange. When, for example, you know, probably some of you know the story of Greece. The process of democratic consolidation in Greece was the result of a process of creating a perfect clientelist system. Once the economic crisis broke the system, then it was very difficult to change such a system. It's very difficult to change. So what happens, for example, when you have a new party such as Syriza, and you have a party that becomes the incumbent party, this new incumbent party without a good experienced political class, what is going to do, not only in Greece, but in Italy, in Spain, to absorb precisely the patterns, the behavior of the old political elite. So you have the transformation of Syriza into, at least partially, this is a reality of these years, I realized when I was doing field research in Greece, Syriza as a party with the clientelist aspect, with clientelist result. And you see some of the consequence of this, some aspect of this, for example, in fascist movements in Italy, when you look at the, for example, the mayor in Rome, the way he runs the town, or other aspect where, in a lot of cases, you see people, say, middle-level elite that used to belong to other parties that entered the new parties. So not only there is a kind of absorption of cultural patterns existing within politics at the time in the different countries, but also a kind a recruitment by the new parties of people that were militants or active in the old traditional parties. So there is a sort of exchange of this. So when you come to the real explanation, you have to realize this. Let me skip this point, although it's more precise in terms of catalyzing effect. But let me go to another point that I think is important. What is behind the explanation that I try to convey to you in terms of this new phenomena, new party, change of patterns of competition, evolution of protest party, the four patterns I was mentioning. Obvious, there is the dissatisfaction. I was already mentioning. But there is also something that is more basic. At the end, the political leaders are simply exploiting, understood and exploiting what is the new social economic situation of our countries in terms of impact of globalization, in terms of changing of the working condition, in terms of dividing, fragmentation of society. Why ultimately the cleavages are not any longer able to perform the role, the task that they did in the past. Because in the past, there were social groups behind the possibility of unification that the cleavage were doing, the way the cleavage were affecting. There were social groups, there were communities, there were, we could say with an old vocabulary that you will understand immediately, social class. But now, no longer, they are no longer. The economic transformation, the working transformation, the impact, some of the impact of globalization meant a transformation of this. At the end, I think this is the point. This is the difficulty of our democracies today. This is the difficulty of our democracies today, because it's more difficult to have the old parties, the parties that were expression of communities, or were expression or manifestation of different communities. You can have, ironically, the relaunching of parties, but not as representative actors, just as intermediation actors. That is, the mechanism of democracy make essential to have intermediation actor. No way out. You remember Schneider, you remember the classic, no way out. But you don't have any longer the actor. So you have the ironic result, the parties are more important. But what parties? Political leaders, small groups. They are more important than earlier, and in the sense they are relaunched, but they have nothing to do with what we used to call parties in the past. It's a totally new definition. That we can stay. You remember the definition by party at the beginning of his an economic theory of democracy of Anthony Downs. Anthony Downs was saying group of people that present at elections. This is the party today. These are the parties today. The parties that were representative actors are over. Of course, being over a lot of ideologies, you have a neo-nationalist thrust. This is very present. And this is very present everywhere. This is the core of the Hungarian politics. This is the core of Polish politics. This is what you find in Slovakia, what you find in all Visegrad group. But this is what you find in Austria. This is what you can find in Germany. This is the Northern League. This is Le Pen. This is what you find in UK. That is this relaunching of a neo-populism, of a neo-nationalism, is some of the content behind what we call neo-populist parties. While the internal fragmentation within the left-right, the problem, the failure of a social democracy is going on. A recent analysis that was making a good review of a transformation of social democracy in Europe, for sure, was stressing how the social democracies, as an impact of the crisis, became against the economic liberalism, while previously they had accepted fully. They became, in a second moment, against the austerity policies, and how most of them, not all of them, not the Italian one, not the Irelandese one, not the Dutch one, but most of social democrats went much more to the left in terms of defending welfare. But the reality of all this left is the internal fragmentation, the growth of the internal fragmentation for the reasons also, the basic reasons I was. Maybe I can skip this point that is very much clarify the rightist populism, if you like, and the leftist populism. Because at the end, if we go on with this idea of neo-populism, we have to make differences with different categories in terms of culture, in terms of organization, in terms of policies they push, in terms of situation. But this is not the aspect I would like to conclude. I would like to conclude with at least 2-3 points. First of all, when we consider democracy today, we have to consider 3 channels of expression: through social movements, through interest group, and through parties. The social movements happens what I told you. That is, they are bound to be transformed, exploited, to be institutionalized in some way. Unions, association entrepreneurs, what could bring about the kind of stabilization that was the formula in the past to go out of the crisis in the 80s, particularly in several European countries, is over. Trade unions, interest groups, so the lobby are there, but not the unions any longer, not the entrepreneurial interest group any longer. The parties, yes, I said, you have a relaunching of parties. But the meaning, the reality is totally different. You have leaders that play a power game to stay in power and, if necessary, to manipulate the dissatisfaction of people. So you have a relaunching of the parties, but not as a representative. Within this game, of course, you have the role of the media, the role of the social networks that also change what the activity of the party. But at the end, this is in a sense my hunch, is that you have a basic, fading away of intermediary institution, a basic fading away of the core aspect of representative democracy. This is a true reason why contemporary democracy is in crisis. This is, at the very end, the reason of the crisis. This is the crisis of the institutions, of representative institutions, because of the social change, because of the economic change, because of the technological change that create other opportunity, create another context. I don't see this moment as a critical juncture, particularly because we don't know yet. Maybe in 10 years we will understand that this moment was a critical juncture. Maybe it was a critical juncture for some countries and not for others. But what I think is at the end of my message is what I told you, and how I develop a little bit more. Liberal democracy, liberal democracy, we use usually a shortcut democracy, but our shortcut means mass liberal democracy is an invention of mankind that no one was looking for in the way we get. But a key element of this invention that we cannot give up is the connection between the system of division of power, the system of checks and balances, the system of protection and rights, and the, say, equalizing policies, if I can say so. That is, policies where there is some content in terms of meeting the needs of the people, in terms of a stronger fairness that then is translated into some kind of better equality, or at least in some kind of reducing the poverty, the exclusions. This is at the end what we cannot throw away. Yes, we can accept, let's be very open and blunt. We can accept, and we will accept, the crisis of representative democracy. Representative democracy never will be back. Forget it. But what we cannot accept is some of the core aspect of representative democracy, that there are the conditions to maintain the protection of rights, the protection of social and political rights that are at core of the old representative democracy. Thank you very much.
Questions for Professor Morlino?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Very interesting. So, my question is related to this role of parties, intermediators, and no longer representatives. So, a term often used in the literature is the idea of party linkage, parties as a linkage. So, how does your conception relate to that, and how would you respond to those authors who in recent years have said, look, to remedy the crisis of political parties, to re-establish party linkage, we need to introduce, for example, mechanisms of intra-party democracy, make parties more inclusive, intra-party deliberation. You seem to be going a different direction.
Yes.
What's your position on this?
Yes. No, very important point. The literature about party linkage was really an important literature. In a sense, let me be very open, as I think among colleagues we should be. I think that this was a literature very much related to countries and culture with a strong civil society. When I was working I've been working a lot, for example, in Latin America. I've been working a lot of course, in Southern Europe, on Southern Europe. I published a couple of books on Eastern Europe. Basically, the point is not the linkage. The point, as I said, precisely in opposition to linkage, anchor. That is a dominant role of a leader that is trying to anchoring, to hook people, and to have people supporting him. So a sort of, with the linkage, at the end, you have a sort of symmetric relationship. In a lot of countries, I don't see this. I mean, you can see this symmetric relationship maybe in Australia. You can see this symmetric relationship in UK. But even in some of German region, there is some German land, there is no such a symmetric relationship. Even in some of Austrian communities, there is let's forget when you consider Eastern Europe, let's forget when you consider Asia, let's forget, I've been working, for example, in South Korea for a while on this topic of quality of democracy. I mean, this is a totally different reality. So this is the reason why in a sense, I left. I was very critical vis-a-vis linkage. I mean, let me make I think an obvious methodological point. There is no good concept by itself. Every concept is an empirical concept. Makes sense when it's grasped better the reality that you are working on. So the term linkage, perfect. It's good for some of US reality, some of UK reality, some of German, Netherlands. When we did a research with a late colleague, a good colleague of mine, Peter Mayer, about the development of patronage in Europe. You see one of the results, of a surprising result of this research, the development of patronage in Norway. That was not expected, but was part of the weakening of parties, of social democratic parties. So the parties was transforming and began using to making law and appointment of these people, loyal people, at the higher echelons of bureaucracy, central and local bureaucracy. Is this linkage? I don't see linkage, even in Norway any longer. But what happens is again relaunching of the intermediation actor, party intermediation actor, not trade unions, not the association of entrepreneurs, where there is an informal lobbying that actually we do not understand how usually works. This is, I mean, you know very well, in our field, there are areas where we talk, but we don't have a strong empirical result. This is one area, is this one of interest group of lobbying and so on. Who knows if at the end lobbying works or not. Yes, because the voting mechanism made this kind of intermediation actor very necessary, impossible. So the very idea of the direct digital democracy is cannot exist. This is at the end my 2 points. Thank you for the question.
A few more questions, Bauke?
Yeah. Professor Morlino, thank you very much for wonderful overview. You mentioned this tripolarization political party system. So I would like to first offer some empirical evidence to back up this new categorization. And second, this tripolar party is this a transitional, short life, or was this a permanent feature of political party system?
Yeah.
And so they will always see there's always emerging third party and always a few years absorbed by the two dominant parties. So this is my question. Thank you.
I'm not able to reply to your question. That is, let me try anyway to reply. That is, we don't know actually. I mean, the logic of competition is a logic that at the end bring always to have two main actors. Because of course, when you go ahead with the competition, you try to make alliance to have at least two actors. But we know that there are actors for whom identity is much more important than to get votes. So in that case, you have the kind of rigidity that can maintain for a long time or even forever a tripolarization. When we had in Italy, for example, the Communist Party, no way. The Communist Party was the Communist Party, and they went on being the Communist Party until the end, until when they transformed. There was an identity situation. So, in a sense, the competition logic is overcome by other possible ideological
priorities. Now, this party that is not able to disappear or to converge toward the polarization, however, can be so successful that can become one of the two poles. So even when there is a kind of identity problem, when there is a kind of a strong idealization, if this a pole become particularly successful for some reason, then you have anyway a convergence toward the two parties. This is the complexity of the situation. Let me make another point that is strategically very relevant, and maybe is the most relevant aspect. When you have a tripolarization, you have the possibility of always defeating the largest party. You understand this? And this is another aspect that is very relevant. But this aspect is a way to keep the tripolarization, if you follow me. So it's a tricky question, and the real reply is an empirical reply. Look at a specific moment, a specific case, and see how can evolve. If I can say about say, I don't know, Spain, just an example where there is a kind of tripolarization, there is the possibility of a bipolarization in Spain, as Podemos is very much in the left. And Podemos could have a good possibility or a prospective, say, with alliance with PSOE, and so have a kind of two poles of this sort. In some other case, this is more difficult. At the end, I think that tripolarization is an important symptom of a democracy not working properly, where competition is not working properly. I mean, we know this reality in a much stronger way when we consider the process of transition to democracy. If we have in mind a simplistic model, we should say that once there is the crisis of the authoritarian regime, in some case that we can consider, we can analyze, then there is the breakdown of the authoritarian regime, and then a game of competition begins, and the end of this game is the new democratic regime. But actually, in the world today, there are about 60 regimes that I define hybrid regime. In all these cases, the competition is frozen. It is trapped within other kind of aspect. Personalization, corruption, no rule of law, a lot of aspects that not allow the mechanism of competition that imply opening, imply freedom in voting, imply civil rights to work properly. I mean, this kind of mechanism is something that in politics is the flesh of politics. This is the substance of politics. Everyone who does politics knows this very well. Let me open a short way. I organized in Italy a school for politicians, for young politicians, people that was mayor or deputy mayor or councillor in the municipality. The reason why I did that is very obvious, because they had their political kind of education within the parties, within party socialization. When the parties are over,
the poor guys, the poor young people, is lost. So I often teach a lecture to these young politicians that are totally lost in a new game that they never learned. But this is the game for a politician, to learn how to transform, in a sense, to distort the mechanism of competition. This is what happens in politics. This is the core of politics.
Another question, gentlemen. There.
Yeah, I think it's.
Oh, there was one question there, and then you, Glenn.
Okay, please.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you, Professor Morlino. I'm Jean-Paul Gagnon from the University of Canada.
And why do we know? I don't know, we will see.
I've written my question down so I can be a bit more articulate.
Okay.
And given what you said about your pedagogical approach to training newcomers to politics, I think I know the answer, but I'll ask nonetheless. Let me just say that I agree with your assessment that representative democracy, as we know it, is coupled. This growing crisis threatens liberalism, constitutionalism, and the means of the weak majorities to hold or fetter powerful minorities and to hold them to account. What worries me is that I don't hear a clear call from inside or outside the academy for how to respond to what Urbinati, for instance, calls the disfigurement of parliamentary democracy, or what Simon Tormey calls post-representation. And it strikes me that it's now our job, I think, to make this path clear. So my question is, are we not now in a time where different models of democracy, such as digital direct, participatory, green, lottery, can stitch the tears, seam the rips, and patch the holes? We are identifying the fabric, forgive the analogy, of representation, so as to, as you say, save the civic and social rights of people, to re-empower powerless.
So you mean we have a future to build? At the end, this is. I tell the truth, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe because as an intellectual, I was always used as a sort of habit to analyze the reality, but not to propose a policy position, because in a sense it was for us a sort of ethical tenet not to be involved into policy proposition, although we made explicit, as I told at the very beginning, our normative position. So maybe I'm not the right person to reply to your question. To tell the truth, to be frank with you, I don't see the workability of the alternative that you mentioned. They will not work. What may work is what is going on. It is a transformation of the representative democracy. Let me again very open to about this. You know very well that the best intellectual is the intellectual that is able to forecast the past. That is to single out what are the most resilient, persistent aspects of the past that will survive and interact with a new aspect and create what will happen in the future. This means that we are bound to understand always only part of the reality, never the future. From this point of view, my reply is obvious. That is, particularly if I look at the way liberal democracy has been, when I make a basic class of political science to my students, and I explain representative democracy, of course, I start with the Roman law. I start with the notion of representation, the private notion of representation in non-Roman law, and the evolution of our notion until mid-age and 17th, 18th century, and so on.
So when you consider democracy today is the result of this kind, there will be a turning point, a tipping point, a critical juncture. I doubt. Democracy is an invention, a mankind invention characterized by continuity and minor changes. Sorry, I cannot be better. I cannot be more optimistic.
Well, the final question.
Thank you for a marvelous presentation. I have two questions. The first concerns the relationship between populism, material inequality, and economic crisis. And I wanted, first of all, just to clarify your argument. Am I right that the statistics indicate that populism arises in Poland even though there wasn't a Great Recession? Is that correct?
Yes.
If that is correct, so that's one possibility. The other possibility is...
So you have two kinds of populism, basically.
Yeah.
Populism is a result of economic crisis, and populism is a result of other problems.
Yes, so that's the question. So it could occur without economic crisis and with economic crisis. So does that mean that, so does that mean it's compatible with or without, basically, material inequality or crisis? And does what's really going on there? So what's really driving the populism? Is it perception of an economic crisis, or is it other cleavages like gender, like race, fear of immigrants, or globalization factors? Can you tell us a little bit more about that relationship? That's the first question. My second question is about social movements. I'm very kind of interested, you talk about how social movements can be exploited by leaders. Can, maybe again following up from the other person, how can we think about fostering social movements that promote democracy? So they're my two questions.
First point, I think that the core aspect to reflect on is the interaction between three factors. Dissatisfaction of the people, that is the core aspect that are exploited by political leader and by tradition of the country. Now, the reason of the satisfaction of the people can be economic crisis or can be other reasons. So this is the reason why. But the core is how the dissatisfaction is exploited and how it's exploited, keeping into account the cultural aspect, the cultural patterns. So this is the element to be considered. What happens to dissatisfaction and how is transformed, shaped in terms of voting behavior, basically, and in terms of building neo-populists, if we can use this expression of protest party. Social movements building, fostering democracy. This is an interesting aspect. So, years ago, I built a data set about all existing democracies. That actually was behind my book, Changes for Democracy. And effectively, one of the results of my research all over the world was that social movements could bring democracy to be a little bit more responsive, if not violent. So is this fostering of democracy in the way you think? Maybe not, because I think that you are thinking about fostering, not democracy, but fostering participation and then foster democracy. Probably you had in mind this, because this is what usually is our analysis. What I found out was in a sense a different pattern. That is social movements, some kind of non-violent protest, making governments more responsive.
Okay, well, we'll have to stop there. We're running a little bit over time, but I would like to thank Professor Morlino for such a stimulating start to the day. And Andrea has a small gift on behalf of the institute.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor
Thank you,
Morlino.
Andrea.
Can I say that as a historian, I so appreciated your paper.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Yeah, well, very nice of you. Thank you, thank you. I'm born as historian.
Okay, and
I think you are.
we'll take a quick break for morning tea, probably about 15 or 20 minutes.